And they did. Look at Stephanie White's reaction after the shot goes in.
Watch Stephanie White's face right there. That's not the reaction of a coach whose play just worked perfectly. That's the face of someone watching their game plan get completely ignored. And what happened in those final seconds has created a divide between the Indiana Fever coaching staff and their star player that nobody wants to talk about publicly. Because here's what we know for certain. Lexi Hall went on Indianapolis radio the next day and said something that should have been a bombshell. She admitted the final play didn't go exactly as planned. Not kinda sorta close. Not mostly right with a small adjustment. She said it didn't go exactly as planned. And when your team just hit a game-winning three-pointer to avoid blowing a 17-point lead, that's a very specific thing to say.
Home. Lexi Hall, at the end of the game on Indianapolis radio, she spilled the beans. She said, that play didn't go exactly as planned. Wait, what do you mean? Caitlin Clark had a wide open three. Wait, getting her wide open to win the game wasn't exactly as planned? Stephanie White's reaction after Caitlin Clark hit the game-winning shot. The reaction of a coach said, that didn't really go exactly as planned, but okay.
So let's establish the facts here. This is the question that matters. Was that final play designed for Kelsey Mitchell or Caitlin Clark? Because if you watch Stephanie White's reaction after the shot goes in, something is very wrong. Most coaches who just won a game on a buzzer beater are sprinting across the court. They're jumping. They're screaming. They're losing their minds with joy. Stephanie White stands there with her arms at her sides, looking like someone just told her the IRS is auditing her. There's no celebration, no fist pump, no smile, just this blank stare that screams, that's not what I called. And remember, this is the same coach who absolutely smothered Kelsey Mitchell with affection earlier in the season after a big shot, chased her down, tackled her, made it a whole moment. But when Caitlin Clark hits the game winner, nothing. And that tells you everything about what just happened.
We got the inbound from Sophie to Caitlin Clark. Now, many people are thinking this is supposed to be right here. Give it to Kelsey Mitchell right here. She's going to get it going downhill. Tries to get a nice pull-up midi or taking it all the way to the rack. However, this misdirection on the backside, Sonia Citrone and Cody McMahon, they miscommunicate. They get lost in assignment. They're supposed to switch and they don't switch. So one goes with Lexi Hall. They both go with Lexi Hall instead of Sonia Citrone switching onto Caitlin Clark. And we have this wide open shot. Caitlin Clark.
Now here's where it gets interesting. Watch the play design carefully. Sophie Cunningham takes the ball out of bounds. Kelsey Mitchell is coming off a screen from Aaliyah Boston at the top of the key. That's your primary action. That's what the defense has to respect first. Mitchell is the Fever's second leading scorer. She's been clutch all season, and she's getting a designed look to attack downhill. But on the backside, there's a second action happening. Lexi Hall is setting a pin-down screen for Caitlin Clark. And this is where the Sun make a catastrophic mistake. Tyasha Harris and Dejonai Carrington are supposed to switch on that screen. It's a basic defensive rotation they've practiced 1,000 times. But they don't switch. They both follow Hull. They both abandon Caitlin Clark. And suddenly Clark is standing there at the top of the arc with nobody within 15 feet of her. Sophie Cunningham sees it immediately. She doesn't even look at Kelsey Mitchell. She fires the pass straight to Clark. 3 seconds on the clock. Caitlin rises up. Splash. Game over.
Interesting. Then we have Millie. I'm Millie Rock on any block. Then we have Millie. The first thing that shows that play wasn't for Caitlin is AB screening to free Mitchell. The second thing is the pin down isn't set for Cece. A lot of serendipity. Sophie made a clutch read and react play, and Cece is clutch as F.
So the question becomes, did Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark go rogue? Did they see the coverage, recognize the opportunity, and just decide to ignore whatever Stephanie White had called? Because that's what it looks like. And the evidence keeps piling up. First, you've got Stephanie White's complete lack of reaction. Then you've got her weird comment in the post-game press conference, where she says Austin Kelly drew up the play, not her. Which is a bizarre thing to volunteer unless you're trying to distance yourself from what just happened. Then you've got Lexi Hall on the radio saying it didn't go as planned. And then you've got the most damning evidence of all. Watch Caitlin Clark walk off the court after hitting that shot. She walks right past Stephanie White, doesn't even make eye contact, gives her this little side dap without looking at her face. And then she turns to Sophie Cunningham and gives her this huge smile. This knowing smile. This "yeah, we just did that" smile. That's not the interaction between a player and coach who just executed the game plan perfectly. That's the interaction between two people who just got away with something.
Stephanie White looking on. Caitlin, what are you doing? People are joking around. Yeah, this is the face you make when you just lost money on a bet. You fixed. You hate to see it. Now, folks, take a look at this interaction between the two.
And here's what makes this even more complicated. Earlier in that same game, Caitlin Clark tried to check back in during a timeout. She's standing up, ready to go back in the game. It's her normal rotation time. She knows when she's supposed to be on the floor, and Stephanie White literally tells her to sit back down, just waves her off, sit down. Not your time. Think about that dynamic for a second. Your best player, the rookie of the year, the person who's selling out every arena in the league, tries to check in at her normal time, and you tell her no. You tell her to sit down. In front of the entire bench, in front of the cameras. That's not normal rotation management. That's a power move. That's a coach establishing who's in charge. And then 3 minutes later, that same player ignores your play call and hits the game winner. The irony is almost too perfect.
See that dap, yeah. Doesn't even look Stephanie White in the eyes. Doesn't even look Stephanie White in the eyes. You know who else had a terrible reaction to this? Look at the bottom of your screen right here, all the way to the right. That's Sue Bird. Look at Sue Bird right here.
Now let's talk about what Stephanie White actually said in the post-game press conference, because this is where it gets really revealing. A reporter asks her about the final play. Standard question. Every coach gets asked about the game-winning play, and instead of taking credit, instead of saying, yeah, we drew that up perfectly, Stephanie White immediately deflects. She says Austin Kelly drew up the play. Austin Kelly, the assistant coach, is the one who's been designing all their after-timeout plays. He drew up the play that got Clark the game-tying 3 against Washington. He drew up the play that got Aaliyah Boston a wide-open mid-range shot that she missed. And he drew up this play too. Why is Stephanie White so eager to give away credit for a game-winning play? Because she knows it didn't work the way it was supposed to. She knows that if Kelsey Mitchell was the primary option and the ball went to Caitlin Clark instead, she can't exactly stand up there and brag about her brilliant play design. So she passes it off to Austin Kelly and hopes nobody digs any deeper.
Still need a new coach. Damn. You can't make this stuff up. Lexi Hull's comments makes me believe they went rogue. Listening to what Lexi Hull had to say on the radio makes me feel like these guys went rogue. Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark gave each other a look coming out of the huddle. Say, that's what we got to do.
Steph, was that the play you drew up, or how much confidence do you have in Caitlin for that shot?
Well, Austin drew up the play. I mean, Austin does a lot of our end-of-game stuff. And
at this point, he should just coach, Stephanie. Please. Can you take another leave of absence, please? At this point, Austin Kelly should just coach. He looks more of the part than you. I don't see him slugging around. I don't see him tweaking. I don't see him arms crossed. He actually carries himself like a leader. You carry yourself like a tweaker.
It was what he drew up. You know, we executed it perfectly. You know, I think you see we've been in a lot of those.
Lexi Hull's looking like, damn, that ain't really what we drew up. Caitlin's looking like, damn, shut the hell up.
End of game situations, and we've done a really good job of executing.
Oh, you can't make this stuff up. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Like the video, hype the video. I appreciate all of the support.
But here's what really matters in all of this. Here's why this story is bigger than just one play. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. The Indiana Fever blew a 17-point lead in that game. 17 points. They were up by 17 in the third quarter, and they nearly lost. And the reason they nearly lost is because Stephanie White sat Caitlin Clark for too long. This has been the pattern all season. The Fever build a lead with Clark on the floor. Then White sits her for her normal rest, and the lead evaporates. The offense stalls. The other team goes on a run, and suddenly a comfortable win becomes a nail-biter. It happened against Washington. It happened against Atlanta. It happened against Connecticut. And it happened again in this game. So when the Fever call timeout with 3 seconds left, down by 1 point, after blowing a 17-point lead, there's tension, there's frustration. Because everyone in that huddle knows they shouldn't even be in this situation. They should have won this game by 15. And now they need a miracle just to escape with a win. And into that tension, Stephanie White or Austin Kelly draws up a play for Kelsey Mitchell. Not for Caitlin Clark, who's been the best clutch shooter in the league all season. Not for the person who's hit more game-winning shots than anyone else on the roster. For Kelsey Mitchell, who's a great player, don't get me wrong, but she's not Caitlin Clark in crunch time.
Oh. Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark gave each other a look coming out of the huddle. Say, hey, that's what we got to do.
Steph, was that the play you drew up, or how much confidence do you have in Caitlin for that shot?
Well, Austin drew up the play. I mean, Austin does a lot of our into game stuff, and
At this point, he should just coach, Stephanie. Please, can you take another leave of absence, please? At this point, Austin Kelly should just coach. He looks more of the part than you. I don't see him slugging around. I don't see him tweaking. I don't see him arms crossed. He actually carries himself like a leader. You carry yourself like a tweaker.
it was what he drew up. We executed it perfectly. I think you see we've been in a lot of those.
Lexi Hull's looking like, damn, that ain't really what we drew up.
So Sophie Cunningham takes the ball out of bounds, and she's got a decision to make. Does she follow the play call and look for Kelsey Mitchell first? Or does she read the defense, see Caitlin Clark wide open, and make the winning play? She chooses option 2, and that choice reveals everything about the real power dynamic on this team. Because here's the thing about veteran players like Sophie Cunningham. She's been in the league for 5 years. She's played for multiple coaches. She's been in 1,000 late-game situations. She knows what wins basketball games. And she knows that when you've got the best shooter in the league standing wide open at the top of the key with 3 seconds left, you give her the ball. You don't care what the play call was. You don't care if the coach wanted something else. You give the ball to your best player, and you live with the results. That's veteran basketball IQ. That's winning basketball. But it's also insubordination. Because if the play was designed for Kelsey Mitchell and Sophie gave it to Caitlin instead, she went rogue. She ignored the coach. She made her own decision in the biggest moment of the game. And she was right. But being right doesn't change the fact that she ignored the play call. And Caitlin Clark knew exactly what was happening. Watch her face when Sophie makes that pass. There's no surprise there. No, oh wow, I'm open. She was expecting that pass. She knew Sophie was going to give it to her, which means they probably talked about it. Maybe not explicitly. Maybe not, hey, if you're open, I'm giving you the ball no matter what. But there was an understanding. A veteran and a rookie who both know that the play call doesn't always make sense. And sometimes you've got to trust your instincts instead. Here's what makes this situation particularly fascinating from a team dynamics perspective. You've got a first-year head coach in Stephanie White, who's trying to establish her authority. You've got a rookie superstar in Caitlin Clark, who's already the most famous player in the league. You've got veterans like Sophie Cunningham, who've seen enough basketball to know when to follow the script and when to improvise. And you've got assistant coaches like Austin Kelly, who might actually be better at play design than the head coach. That's a recipe for conflict, because in a normal team hierarchy, the head coach calls the play and everyone executes it. No questions asked, no freelancing. You run the play, and if it doesn't work, that's on the coach. But when you've got a player like Caitlin Clark, someone who sees the game at an elite level, someone who's been hitting clutch shots since high school, that normal hierarchy gets complicated. Does Caitlin Clark need to run the play exactly as called, or does she have the freedom to make reads and adjustments? And if she does have that freedom, how much freedom? Can she completely ignore the play call if she sees something better? These are questions every team with a superstar has to answer, and based on what we saw in this game, the Fever haven't answered them yet. Look at the great player-coach relationships in basketball history. Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan, Greg Popovich and Tim Duncan, Gino Auriemma and Diana Taurasi. In every case, there was mutual respect. The coach trusted the player to make reads within the system. The player trusted the coach's game plan. And when they disagreed, they worked it out behind closed doors. But what we're seeing with Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark doesn't look like mutual respect. It looks like tension. It looks like a coach who's trying to assert control and a player who's trying to win games. And those two goals don't always align. Think about that moment when Clark tried to check back into the game and White told her to sit down. That's not just rotation management. That's a statement. That's a coach saying, I'm in charge here, not you. And maybe that needed to be said. Maybe Clark was getting too comfortable making her own decisions about when to play and when to rest. But the optics are terrible. Because to everyone watching, it looks like a coach benching her best player out of spite. And then when Clark hits the game winner, she doesn't even celebrate with her coach. She celebrates with Sophie Cunningham. She celebrates with her teammates. But when she walks past Stephanie White, it's just this perfunctory dap, this obligatory acknowledgement, nothing more. And that tells you where the real relationships are on this team. Clark trusts her teammates. She's not sure about her coach yet. Now let's talk about Lexi Hull's radio interview. Because this is where someone finally said the quiet part out loud. Hull could have just given the standard athlete answer. Yeah, great play design, we executed perfectly, credit to the coaches. That's what 99% of players would say. But instead, Hull said the play didn't go exactly as planned, and then she tried to walk it back a little bit, but the damage was done. She admitted it. Why would Hull say that? Maybe she didn't realize how it would sound. Maybe she was just being honest without thinking about the implications. Or maybe she wanted people to know. Maybe there's frustration on this team about the coaching, and Hull let it slip. Because if you're a player on the Fever, and you watch your team blow lead after lead because of rotation decisions, and you watch your best player get told to sit down in crunch time, you might be frustrated too. And sometimes that frustration leaks out in interviews. The other piece of evidence that keeps getting overlooked is Cheryl Miller's reaction on the broadcast. Miller is sitting courtside as an analyst, and when Clark hits that shot, watch her face. There's no excitement, no joy. She barely reacts. And Miller has been one of the more critical voices about Clark all season. She's questioned her defense. She's questioned her decision-making. She's been very measured in her praise. So when Clark hits a game-winning three-pointer, you'd expect at least some acknowledgement, some wow, great shot. But Miller just sits there, and that reaction tells you something about how certain people in the WNBA establishment view Caitlin Clark. They don't want to give her credit. They don't want to celebrate her success, because her success threatens the narrative they've been building for years. The narrative is that the WNBA has always been great, and the media just hasn't covered it properly. The narrative is that there are dozens of players just as talented as Clark, and she's only famous because of her college career. The narrative is that rookies need to earn their respect, not have it handed to them. And every time Caitlin Clark does something incredible, it challenges that narrative. So people like Cheryl Miller just don't react. They pretend it's not a big deal. They move on quickly. But here's what they're missing. Caitlin Clark hitting game winners is good for the WNBA. Her being a superstar is good for the league. The ratings prove it. The attendance proves it. The merchandise sales prove it. But there's a segment of WNBA fans and media who resent her success, who wish the attention was distributed more evenly, who think she's getting opportunities that other players deserve. And that resentment shows up in moments like this. When she hits a clutch shot and the reaction is muted. So where does this leave the Indiana Fever moving forward? Because this isn't sustainable. You cannot have a head coach and a star player who don't trust each other. You cannot have players freelancing on game-winning plays. You cannot have assistant coaches drawing up plays while the head coach distances herself from them. Something has to change. The optimistic view is that this is just growing pains. Stephanie White is a first-year coach. Caitlin Clark is a rookie. They're figuring out how to work together. And once they build trust and establish better communication, these issues will resolve themselves. Maybe by next season, they'll have a relationship like Dawn Staley and Aja Wilson. Mutual respect, clear roles, championship contention. The pessimistic view is that this is only going to get worse. Because if White keeps making decisions that Clark disagrees with, and Clark keeps ignoring play calls when she thinks she knows better, the tension will escalate. And eventually, either White gets fired or Clark requests a trade. And neither of those outcomes is good for the Fever. But here's what I think is most likely to happen. The Fever will make some changes to the coaching staff in the offseason. Maybe Austin Kelly gets promoted to a bigger role. Maybe they bring in another veteran assistant who can bridge the gap between White and Clark. And they'll have conversations about roles and decision-making and trust. And they'll try to make it work, because the alternative